It was supposed to be the happiest day of David's life. The sun was shining, the guests were smiling, and soft music played in the background. The bride looked perfect in white, holding a bouquet of red roses. But something felt off. Deep down, Jake, David's 13-year-old son, felt a cold chill in his bones. His eyes didn't leave the bride. Not even for a second. Have you ever had a feeling that something's just not right? Like the world is smiling, but your heart is whispering, look closer. Jake felt that way. And he couldn't shake it off. He had tried to ignore it. He had tried to tell himself he was just scared of change. But no. This wasn't about being scared. It was about being sure. And when the priest said, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, speak now." Jake stood up. His voice was shaking, but his words were clear. "Stop the wedding." Gasps filled the room. All eyes turned to the boy. David's heart dropped. Vanessa's smile froze. And at that moment, everything changed. David wasn't just successful, he was admired. After losing his wife to a sudden illness, he didn't fall apart. He stayed strong for his son, Jake. He worked harder, woke up earlier, and made sure Jake never felt alone. But that didn't mean David wasn't hurting. He was. Deeply. The house felt too quiet sometimes. The dinner table had one empty chair every night. Jake tried to keep his dad smiling, but David's eyes always carried a little bit of sadness. Then came Vanessa. David met her at a fundraising event for the local library. She walked in wearing a dark green dress and a calm, confident smile. She seemed like someone who had it all together. David introduced himself politely, and they talked about books, travel, and family. Vanessa said she lost her parents young and always wanted to be part of a close family. They had coffee the next week. Then lunch. Then dinner. The connection was fast. Almost too fast. Jake met her 2 weeks later. She brought him a baseball cap from his favorite team and smiled brightly. "I've heard so much about you," she said sweetly. Jake smiled back but said very little. You know that feeling when someone gives you a gift, but you don't know why? That's how Jake felt. Like Vanessa wanted him to like her right away. Like she was acting nice, not being nice. Still, Jake didn't complain. He watched. Vanessa was everywhere now, making breakfast, cleaning the kitchen, organizing movie nights. She made his dad laugh, and that made Jake happy, or at least he told himself that. But something didn't feel right. Sometimes, he caught Vanessa staring at his dad when he wasn't looking, with a strange, almost cold expression. Other times, she touched Jake's shoulder just a little too long. Like she was testing him. One evening, Jake was in the hallway when he heard Vanessa talking on the phone. She was whispering, but he could still hear her words, "Don't worry. I've got him wrapped around my finger." Wrapped around her finger? Jake froze. Was she talking about his dad? He wanted to ask her who she was talking to. But something told him not to. Not yet. He didn't tell his dad. He didn't want to cause trouble. What if he was wrong? What if he was just being paranoid? But that night, he couldn't sleep. Have you ever had a secret that kept you awake? That made your heart race when you thought about it? That was how Jake felt. The next morning, Vanessa smiled at him like nothing had happened. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, placing pancakes in front of him. Jake forced a smile. But now, he was watching. And soon, he'd see something that would prove his feeling was more than just a feeling. It was real. Jake tried to go about his day like normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. Every time Vanessa smiled, it felt fake. Every time she laughed, Jake wondered who she really was underneath. Sometimes, it's not what people say. It's how they say it. It's how their eyes don't match their words. Jake began noticing more things. Vanessa was always busy on her phone when David wasn't around. And one time, Jake peeked over her shoulder. She quickly turned the screen away. That night, Jake got out of bed for some water. On his way to the kitchen, he heard whispering again. He stood behind the door. He trusts me completely. In 2 weeks, it'll all be ours. Just stay patient. Jake's hands went cold. She was talking to someone. But who? And what did she mean by ours? The next day, Jake told his dad. I think Vanessa is hiding something. She talks on the phone late at night. She hides her screen from me. David sighed. Jake, I know it's been hard since your mom passed. And it's not easy to accept someone new. But I promise, Vanessa cares about you. Jake wanted to scream. But he didn't. He just nodded. Okay, Dad. Sometimes, adults don't listen the first time. Sometimes, they don't want to believe something bad. Vanessa, meanwhile, started acting differently around Jake. Colder. Sharper. One morning, Jake accidentally spilled juice on the kitchen counter. Vanessa's smile dropped. Can't you ever be careful, she snapped. It was just a glass of juice. But in that moment, Jake saw the real Vanessa. And it scared him. He needed help. And he knew exactly who to call, his cousin Lily. She was 14, smart, curious, and always ready for a mystery. Jake told her everything. The late-night whispers. The strange conversations. The fake smile. Lily didn't laugh. She listened. We need to find out more. Let's watch her. That night, they set a small voice recorder near the hallway. Jake pretended to sleep. Vanessa's phone rang. We're so close. He's already changing the will. Jake clenched his fists. That was all he needed to hear. He looked at Lily. We're going to stop her. No matter what. End of chapter 2, chapter 3 coming next. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It had been building up for weeks, and now it was undeniable. Vanessa's behavior was off. It was subtle, but it was there, hiding just beneath the surface of her sweet smile and perfect manners. Every time Jake looked at her, something in his gut twisted. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew she wasn't who she seemed to be. One afternoon, as Jake was walking through the hallway, he saw Vanessa leave the study room with a thick, leather-bound folder tucked under her arm. Her eyes were darting nervously, and when she noticed Jake standing there, she gave him a forced smile. Hi, sweetie, she said in her usual sing-songy voice. Hey, Jake mumbled, pretending to be absorbed in the pages of his comic book. But inside, his mind was racing. Why was she so jumpy? Why was she acting like she had something to hide? Later that night, after dinner, Jake noticed that Vanessa had locked the study door behind her. Normally, the study was a place where David kept his work documents, nothing private or secret. But tonight, something felt different. Jake didn't want to snoop, but the nagging suspicion gnawed at him. He had to know what was inside that folder. The next morning, after David left for a meeting, Jake cautiously approached the study. He tried the door handle. It was locked, just as he expected. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was no turning back now. He quickly grabbed a paperclip from his dad's desk, straightened it, and bent it into the shape of a small key. It was a trick his cousin Lily had shown him, and though it wasn't foolproof, he hoped it would work. With a few attempts, the door creaked open. Jake stepped inside, trying to make as little noise as possible. The room was filled with the scent of leather and old books, and there, on the desk, was the folder. His hands trembled as he reached for it, carefully flipping it open. The first paper was a legal document, a will. Jake's eyes widened as he read the terms. The will stated that if David died before Vanessa, she would inherit everything, his house, his business, his investments. Everything. But there was more. Jake flipped through the papers, and his heart skipped a beat. The next page was a list of bank transfers, large sums of money sent to a foreign account in the name of a company he had never heard of. His fingers traced the words, his mind struggling to comprehend what he was reading. Vanessa had been sending money to an offshore account. What was she planning? Jake shoved the papers back into the folder and quickly closed the door behind him. His thoughts raced as he walked back to his room. The questions that filled his mind were unbearable. Why would Vanessa need this kind of money? Who was she working with? And what did she want from his dad? The pieces were starting to fit together, but there was still so much he didn't understand. As Jake sat at his desk, trying to make sense of the documents, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that he was running out of time. The more he discovered, the more questions piled up. Vanessa was hiding something. But the pieces of the puzzle didn't fit together yet. He needed help, someone who could dig deeper, someone who understood how to get to the truth. And there was only one person he could trust, Lily. Lily was Jake's cousin. She was 14, a year older than him, and probably the smartest person he knew. She was tech-savvy and always had a solution for everything. If anyone could help him figure out Vanessa's secrets, it was her. He called her that night. Lily, you have to help me. I think Vanessa is up to something, but I don't know what. I need to find out what she's doing. Will you help me? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Jake, what's going on? What did you find? I'll tell you everything, Jake said, lowering his voice. But we need to meet up first. Tomorrow, at the library. Can you get away? Of course. I'll be there. I'll bring my laptop. The next day, they met at the local library after school. The quiet hum of the building was perfect for what they needed to do, investigate. Jake sat down across from Lily, his mind buzzing with the things he had discovered. I think Vanessa's hiding money, and I think she's been lying about everything. She's not who she says she is. Lily raised an eyebrow. You know I'm in, but we need a plan. What's our first step? Jake pulled out the folder with the documents he had taken from the study. I've already started. But we need to dig deeper. Vanessa's been sending money to some overseas account. And she's been keeping things from Dad, like this will. It's all starting to feel wrong. Lily nodded as she scanned the papers. Okay, this is big. But it's not enough to prove anything. We need to track down those transfers. Find out who's on the other end of those accounts. Jake's heart raced. But how do we do that? I'll tell you, Lily said, opening her laptop and logging into her encrypted research portal. We'll start with her phone records. It's easy enough to access her public social media too. People always leave little clues. Jake stared at her in awe. You're a genius, you know that. Lily smirked. I know. Let's start with the basics. They worked for hours, piecing together small pieces of the puzzle. First, Lily accessed Vanessa's social media profiles. There, they found something strange. Vanessa had posted about a business trip to a tropical island last summer, but she'd never mentioned it to David. Jake's suspicion grew. What was she really doing there? Then, they dug into the phone records. They found several late-night calls from an international number, a number Jake didn't recognize. It was one of the leads they needed. But there was still no direct evidence linking Vanessa to a crime. They were getting closer, but they had to tread carefully. As the wedding day drew nearer, the tension in the house became almost unbearable. David was excited, but Jake's unease only grew. The clues they had uncovered, the strange meetings, the money transfers, all of it was leading him down a path he couldn't ignore. But every time he tried to talk to his dad, he felt like David was slipping further away. Vanessa had a way of making everything seem perfect. She was calm, collected, and always had a way of soothing David's concerns. When Jake tried to voice his worries, she would smile sweetly and dismiss him. "Jake, you're just nervous about change. I understand. But everything's going to be fine, sweetheart." She had an answer for everything, and David always sided with her. The more Jake tried to get his dad to listen, the more it felt like David was being pulled into her web. It was as if Vanessa had a hold on him, a hold that Jake couldn't break, no matter how hard he tried. And then, there was the therapy suggestion. "Jake, honey, I think it would be a good idea for you to talk to someone about all of this. You're just not adjusting well to the idea of me marrying your dad," Vanessa had said one evening after dinner. Her voice was soft, but there was an underlying force behind it. "It's a big change, and I know it's hard for you." Jake stared at her, his heart pounding. This wasn't about therapy. This was about control. She was trying to isolate him, make him feel like he was the one with the problem. But she couldn't fool him anymore. He knew what she was up to. "Dad, I'm telling you, something's wrong," Jake had shouted one night after dinner. His voice cracked with frustration. "Vanessa isn't who she says she is. She's hiding something, and I can prove it." David sighed, his expression turning stern. "Jake, I know you're upset. But this is important to me. Vanessa makes me happy, and you need to accept that. You'll see, everything is going to be fine. Just trust me." The word stung. It felt like his dad was brushing him off, like he was just a kid who didn't understand. Jake's stomach twisted with disappointment. He wasn't just some jealous son. He was trying to protect his dad. But David wouldn't listen. Vanessa played the part of the perfect fiancée flawlessly. She was charming, graceful, and always made sure to show David how much she cared. She made him feel like the luckiest man alive, and with each passing day, he seemed more and more convinced that marrying her was the best decision of his life. She even made an effort to get along with Jake, but Jake wasn't fooled. He could see through the smiles, the soft words, the constant compliments. It all felt too calculated. The wedding invitations had already been sent. The venue had been booked. There was no turning back. David was so sure about his decision, so wrapped up in Vanessa's promises, that he couldn't see what was right in front of him. But Jake could. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he stared at the files scattered across his desk. He couldn't sleep. The wedding was tomorrow, and this was his last chance to stop it. The weight of everything that had happened, the lies, the secrets, the manipulation, was crushing. He could feel it pressing down on him, suffocating him. But this was it. He had all the evidence he needed. Vanessa had been careful, but not careful enough. She'd left behind a trail of clues, and now Jake had the proof to expose her. The photos, the recordings, the documents, it was all there. He couldn't back down now. He just had to make sure he presented it in the right way. Lily was already on her way over to help him organize everything. They had a plan, and it had to work. But Jake couldn't shake the fear that if he failed, he would lose his dad forever. What if David didn't believe him? What if he sided with Vanessa and turned his back on Jake? The thought was unbearable. As Jake sat there, his mind raced. Vanessa had been married 3 times before. Each time, she'd married a wealthy man, and each time, those men had mysteriously lost everything, money, property, and in some cases, their reputations. It wasn't just a coincidence. Jake had found the records. Each of her ex-husbands had died or disappeared under strange circumstances. And now, she was trying to do the same thing to his dad. Jake's stomach churned as he looked through the final piece of the puzzle, a will that Vanessa had hidden in David's study. It was dated 6 months ago, and it outlined a plan for David to transfer everything he owned into a joint account, an account that was controlled by Vanessa. The will had been signed, but not by David. It had been forged. That was the smoking gun. If he showed this to David, there would be no question. It would be enough to expose Vanessa for who she really was. Just then, Lily walked into the room, her eyes scanning the scattered papers and files on the desk. "We've got everything we need, right?" she asked, a hint of anxiety in her voice. Jake nodded, pushing the papers toward her. "This is it. We have the proof. We have to make sure Dad sees everything before the wedding starts." Lily raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about this? This is going to change everything. Once we do this, there's no going back." Jake hesitated for a moment, then nodded firmly. "I have to do this. For Dad. I can't let Vanessa ruin his life. If I don't stop this, she's going to take everything from him, and I'll never forgive myself." Lily let out a breath. "Okay, let's do this." They spent the next few hours putting together a presentation. It wasn't just a slideshow of photos or a pile of documents. This had to be a story, a clear, undeniable narrative that David couldn't ignore. They included the audio recordings of Vanessa's conversations, the photographs of her handing money to that mysterious man, and the screenshots of her deleted messages. They included the forged will, the evidence of her past marriages, and everything they had learned about her dark history. This wasn't just a matter of proving that Vanessa was a liar, it was a matter of proving that she was dangerous. By the time they were done, Jake felt a sense of urgency unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He knew that if they didn't act quickly, it might be too late. The wedding was just hours away, and everything was set in motion. Vanessa was already dressed and ready. Guests were arriving. The priest was waiting. The doors of the church were ready to swing open, and David would walk down the aisle, ready to marry a woman who had been using him all along. Jake couldn't let that happen. Lily looked at him, her eyes serious. "Are you ready? We can't turn back once we start this." Jake swallowed hard, his heart racing. "I have to be. This is the only chance I have to save him." As they packed everything up and got ready to head to the church, Jake's mind kept racing. What would happen when David saw the truth? Would he be angry? Would he understand? Would he believe that Jake had been trying to protect him all along? Or would he be so devastated by the betrayal that he wouldn't know what to do? Jake shook his head, trying to clear the thoughts. He had to focus. He had to stay strong. This was the moment that would change everything. Jake stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not going to ruin anything. I'm going to save him." Vanessa's eyes locked onto his, a flicker of anger flashing behind her composed demeanor. But she didn't say another word. She simply turned away and started clearing the dishes. Jake felt his heart pounding. He had to do this. Today was the day. His dad might not understand at first, but once he saw everything, once he heard the truth, there would be no going back. The ceremony was set to start in a few hours. Guests were arriving. The flowers had been arranged. The church was already filled with anticipation. Jake grabbed his phone and looked at the slideshow they'd created, the photos, the documents, the recordings. It was all there. All the proof he needed to expose Vanessa for who she really was. He wasn't going to wait any longer. He was done being quiet, done hiding his suspicions. He had to do it before the vows. He couldn't let her say, "I do," and ruin his dad's life. He needed to tell David. But how? How could he make his dad believe him after everything Vanessa had done to make him feel loved and special? Just then, Lily sent him a message, "It's time." Jake took a deep breath and walked toward the front door, ready to face the reality of the moment. His palms were sweating, his heart racing. He didn't know if he could do this, but he knew one thing for sure, there was no turning back. The wedding was about to begin. The church was alive with excitement. Guests took their seats, their faces glowing with joy, smiles all around. The sound of soft classical music drifted through the air, adding a touch of elegance to the occasion. The flowers were perfect, the decorations pristine. Every little detail had been carefully thought out to ensure that David and Vanessa's wedding was nothing short of spectacular. Jake felt like he was in a different world. His heart hammered in his chest as he stood near the back of the church, clutching the folder with all the evidence. He was surrounded by guests, his dad, and the bride, all blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The doors of the church were about to open. In a matter of minutes, Vanessa would walk down the aisle, and David would stand there, ready to say, "I do." Jake swallowed hard. He had to act now. There was no time left. Lily stood by his side, her eyes wide with nerves. She could feel the tension radiating off Jake. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered, almost as if she was trying to talk him out of it. Jake nodded, his throat dry. "I have to. I'm doing this for Dad. If I don't, she'll have him wrapped around her finger, and we'll never get him back." Lily didn't say anything, but her hand squeezed his in support. The music changed, and the guests rose from their seats. Jake could hear the faint sound of Vanessa's heels clicking against the church floor as she made her way toward the altar. His breath caught in his throat. This was it. The moment he had been dreading and anticipating all at once. If he didn't act now, it would be too late. The priest's voice boomed, signaling the beginning of the ceremony. He asked David, "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" David smiled brightly, ready to say yes, but before he could get the words out, Jake couldn't hold it in any longer. His voice rang out, shaking but loud enough to stop everything in its tracks. "Stop the wedding." The room froze. Every eye turned to him. Vanessa's face went pale, her smile vanishing in an instant. David's face was a mixture of shock and confusion, his eyes searching Jake's face for an explanation. "Jake, what are you doing?" David asked, his voice tight with concern. "What is this?" Jake stood tall, despite the tremor in his hands. He didn't flinch. This was the moment he had been preparing for. He stepped forward, holding up the folder that contained the truth. "I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't let you marry her," Jake said, his voice firm. "Vanessa isn't who she says she is." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. People exchanged confused glances. David's expression faltered, a look of disbelief crossing his face. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice starting to shake. "I have proof. I have everything you need to see the truth," Jake said, his voice still strong. "She's been lying to you, using you. She's not here for love. She's here for your money." Jake looked at the priest and then at the guests, making sure everyone was listening. He felt a surge of courage, the weight of his mission driving him forward. "I know it's hard to believe, but I've been watching her for months. I've been tracking her every move. I found the documents, the recordings, the messages. I have everything." David shook his head, clearly not ready to believe what Jake was saying. "Jake, this isn't the time for." "I have the will she forged," Jake cut in, pulling out the documents and placing them on the altar for everyone to see. "I have the photos of her meeting with that guy she's been talking to behind your back. And I have the recordings of her conversations, the ones where she talks about taking everything you have." The room fell silent. Everyone was staring at Jake, some in disbelief, some in shock, others in awe. Vanessa's face had drained of color, her hands trembling slightly as she took a step back. She was starting to realize that Jake had everything. Everything. "No," Vanessa whispered, her voice shaking. This is all lies." Jake pulled out the final piece of evidence, a recording of Vanessa speaking with the man who had been helping her. She was clear as day in the recording, saying, "Once I marry him, we'll have access to everything he owns. He'll be too in love to question me." The church gasped in unison. David's face was a mask of disbelief, his eyes locked on the evidence. He turned to Vanessa, searching her face for any sign of truth, but all he saw was the coldness he had ignored for so long. The truth was undeniable. Vanessa's composure crumbled. She reached out toward David, but her voice faltered. "David, please, you have to believe me. I love you." But David was beyond words. The betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had loved, she was nothing but a liar, a fraud. He couldn't breathe. His mind was racing, but all he could think was one thing: how had he not seen this sooner? Before he could speak, Vanessa turned toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor as she made a break for it. But Jake wasn't done. As she reached the door, David grabbed her by the arm and spun her around. "No. You're not going anywhere," David said, his voice cold and hard. "I'm calling the police." Jake stood tall, watching as Vanessa's world began to crumble. It was over. She was done. And she wasn't going to get away with it. "No," Vanessa whispered, her voice shaking. This is all lies." Jake pulled out the final piece of evidence, a recording of Vanessa speaking with the man who had been helping her. She was clear as day in the recording, saying, "Once I marry him, we'll have access to everything he owns. He'll be too in love to question me." The church gasped in unison. David's face was a mask of disbelief, his eyes locked on the evidence. He turned to Vanessa, searching her face for any sign of truth, but all he saw was the coldness he had ignored for so long. The truth was undeniable. Vanessa's composure crumbled. She reached out toward David, but her voice faltered. "David, please, you have to believe me. I love you." But David was beyond words. The betrayal hit him like a punch to the gut. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had loved, she was nothing but a liar, a fraud. He couldn't breathe. His mind was racing, but all he could think was one thing: how had he not seen this sooner? Before he could speak, Vanessa turned toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor as she made a break for it. But Jake wasn't done. As she reached the door, David grabbed her by the arm and spun her around. "No. You're not going anywhere," David said, his voice cold and hard. "I'm calling the police." Jake stood tall, watching as Vanessa's world began to crumble. It was over. She was done. And she wasn't going to get away with it. The aftermath was overwhelming, to say the least. The wedding, which had begun with such promise, had turned into a courtroom drama. Guests slowly began to trickle out of the church, their hushed conversations filled with disbelief. The grand celebration was gone. The grand deception had been exposed. David and Jake stood near the altar, their eyes still locked on the spot where Vanessa had been moments before, now an empty space that once seemed filled with so much hope. But now, it felt like nothing more than a stage for betrayal. David was numb. He had a million things racing through his mind. How had he not seen it? How had he been so blinded by his desire for love again, that he had let a stranger into his life without asking the right questions? He'd let her into their home, into their hearts. And she had nearly destroyed everything. The weight of it all hung over him like a heavy fog. He couldn't look at Jake without feeling both gratitude and guilt. Gratitude for his son's bravery, for his quick thinking and unwavering belief that something was wrong. But guilt, the crushing realization that he had failed to see the truth, had failed to protect his own son when it mattered most. Jake, meanwhile, was struggling with his own emotions. He had done what he had to do. What he knew was right. But it wasn't easy. Watching the woman he thought would become his stepmother being dragged away in handcuffs, hearing her angry words as she was led out, it all felt unreal. His heart ached for his dad. He didn't want David to feel guilty. He didn't want him to blame himself. But there was no way to undo the hurt that had been caused. No way to take back all the moments of trust that had been shattered in an instant. As they walked out of the church, Jake saw the familiar faces of family and friends, his aunt, his cousin Lily, and even a few neighbors who had come to celebrate. They all looked at him with a mix of shock and admiration. He could see the questions in their eyes, the confusion at what had just transpired. His aunt, Carla, walked up to him, pulling him into a tight hug. "Jake, I don't know what to say. You were incredible in there." Jake smiled weakly, his throat tight. "I didn't want this to happen. I had to stop it. I couldn't let her hurt Dad." Carla nodded, her eyes moist. "You did the right thing. You saved him. You're a hero, Jake." Jake looked over at David, who was standing a few feet away, speaking with a police officer. His dad's face was still pale, his hands shaking slightly. He was going through a storm of his own, processing the events and what they meant for their future. He had trusted someone. Loved someone. And now, that love had turned to ashes. David turned toward them, his eyes meeting Jake's. For a moment, the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. He didn't need anyone to tell him what his son had done. He knew. He felt it. Jake walked up to him, his heart full of mixed emotions. He reached out, touching his dad's arm gently. David looked down at him, his expression softening. "Jake, I don't know how to thank you for what you did. I was blind, and you opened my eyes." Jake shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't need to thank me, Dad. I just wanted to protect you. Like you always protect me." David's throat tightened, and his eyes welled with tears. He pulled Jake into a hug, holding him tightly. "You don't know how much that means to me," he whispered. For a long moment, they stood there, just holding each other. The world around them had changed in ways they couldn't even begin to understand yet, but one thing was certain, they had each other. And that was enough. Later, after the police had finished their statements and everyone had left, the two of them drove home in silence. The car ride felt long and heavy. David couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, about how close he had come to losing everything, not just his money, but his dignity, his trust in himself, and his relationship with Jake. When they got home, David sat at the kitchen table, his mind still spinning. He needed to talk to someone. He needed to make sense of everything. He needed to ask Jake if he was okay. Jake, sensing his father's need for a moment of connection, sat down next to him. He didn't need words. They just sat there, together, in the quiet of the evening. Finally, David spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Jake, I've failed you. I let someone in who shouldn't have been in our lives. I never should have let that happen. I'm sorry." Jake looked at him, shaking his head. "No, Dad. You didn't fail me. You've always been there for me. I couldn't stand seeing her hurt you." David smiled faintly, his eyes softening. "You've always been my protector. And today, you proved it. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Jake looked at his dad, his eyes serious. "You don't have to. Just, promise me you'll be more careful next time. And we'll get through this together." David nodded, feeling a weight lifted from his chest. "I promise." And just like that, the storm inside David's heart began to calm. It wasn't just about moving on from the betrayal. It was about learning from it. And above all, it was about the bond he shared with his son. No matter what happened next, David knew one thing for sure, Jake was the best thing that had ever happened to him. The days that followed were anything but normal. The scandal of Vanessa's arrest sent ripples through their small town. News outlets covered the shocking events of the wedding day, and suddenly, Jake's name was everywhere. But as overwhelming as it was, Jake didn't mind. In fact, he kind of liked the attention, not because of the drama, but because it brought him and his dad closer than ever. David was still processing the fact that the woman he thought he would marry was a fraud, a manipulator who had tricked him into thinking she cared about their family. But despite the betrayal, David knew that one of the best things he could do for himself, and for Jake, was to focus on the future. It was time to rebuild their lives, together. For the first time in a long time, David found himself able to smile again. He was no longer drowning in sadness or guilt. His son had saved him, in more ways than one. Jake, too, was slowly finding peace. He spent time with his friends, went back to school, and even started going to therapy. He talked to a counselor who helped him process everything that had happened and how he was feeling. He had been through a lot for a 13-year-old, and it wasn't easy. But with his dad by his side, he knew he could face anything. One afternoon, as they sat together in the living room, David turned to Jake. He had a glint of mischief in his eye, something that Jake hadn't seen in a long time. "Hey, you know what? I think we need to do something fun," David said. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Fun? After everything that happened?" David chuckled. "Exactly. After everything that happened, I think it's time for us to start doing the things we love again. We've spent too much time worrying about the past. What do you think?" Jake smiled, feeling a sense of relief. "I'm in. But what do you have in mind?" David grinned. "How about we start something new? You, me, and Lily. Maybe a YouTube channel." Jake blinked. A YouTube channel? It had been a year since that fateful day when Jake had stood up in the middle of the wedding ceremony and stopped the whole thing. A year since Vanessa's lies had been exposed, and life for David and Jake had changed forever. A year since they had embarked on a new adventure, the Mystery Crew. Now, as the sun set behind their house, casting a warm golden glow across the yard, Jake sat on the porch steps, scrolling through his phone. The screen lit up with notifications. The Mystery Crew had just hit 100,000 subscribers. It wasn't the millions some YouTubers had, but for Jake and his dad, it felt like an achievement they could be proud of. David walked up beside him, his smile wide. "Looks like we've got something to celebrate." Jake looked up, grinning. "I guess we do. Who would have thought a year ago that we'd be here, right?" David sat down next to him, his voice softening. "You've come a long way, Jake. We both have. I'm proud of you. Proud of us." Jake nodded, looking out at the horizon. It had been a crazy year, one full of ups and downs. They had faced betrayal, doubt, and fear. But now, they were stronger. Together. "You know," Jake said, breaking the silence, "sometimes I still think about what would have happened if I hadn't said anything at the wedding. What if I had kept quiet?" David placed a hand on his shoulder. "Jake, you did what you felt was right. You saved me. And in doing so, you saved us both. You made sure we didn't fall into something that could have destroyed everything. You're the reason we're here, right now." Jake smiled at his dad's words. "I'm glad I did." A car pulled up to the driveway, and Lily, his cousin, hopped out, waving as she jogged up the steps. "Guess what? Vanessa's trial is finally over." David and Jake both turned to her, waiting for the news. Lily's face was serious as she continued. "She got 20 years in prison. For everything, fraud, theft, and all that other stuff she did." Jake's heart skipped a beat. The weight of the past year lifted just a little bit more. For a moment, everything felt like it was finally put to rest. "That's good," David said quietly. "It means no one else will fall for her tricks. No one else will get hurt." Lily sat down beside them, grinning. "And guess what? Your channel just blew up again. Another viral video. Looks like we're going places." Jake laughed. "Yeah, who knew people liked watching us solve mysteries so much?" David smiled, shaking his head. "You too. You've turned something that started as a way to cope into something amazing. I couldn't be prouder of you both." The three of them sat there for a while, the evening breeze gentle and calming. For the first time in a long time, David felt at peace. The pain of losing someone he thought he could trust had faded, replaced with the love and support of the one person who mattered most, Jake. A year ago, David had been lost. A year ago, he had been blinded by love, only to find himself betrayed by the woman he had hoped would be a part of his future. But now, he knew the truth, the future he needed was already here. It was with Jake. "You know," David said, looking out at the sunset, "I think we're ready for the next chapter." "What do you think?" Jake smiled. "Yeah, I think so too. And this time, we're doing it the right way." David chuckled. "That's the spirit." As they sat there, looking toward the future, it became clear, sometimes, the biggest heroes come in the smallest sizes. And sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't the ones we expect, but the ones we already have, right in front of us. The end. Subscribe now, watch more.